Hello, and welcome to Simple Life Philosophy. I am your host, Ed Raby. This is the channel where I take you on my journey to discover a simple philosophy of life that is both easy to understand and easy to execute. Today I'm looking at Chapter 3 of How to Be a Stoic. This is going to be kind of a running series as I kind of try to take the issues. And today I want to look at 3 highlights that I took away from the book that I felt were really good highlights for me in helping to understand my own journey into Stoicism. The chapter 3, actually, though, is part of a larger thing where this book starts to be divided into 3 parts. And the first of this parts is, part 1 is the idea of what is proper to want and what is not proper to want. Okay, so that's a different word, proper. Okay, it's not, the idea is what should we want and what is okay to want and what is not okay to want. Okay, and the first of the chapters, chapter 3, is the first chapter of this first part, and it deals with some things are in our power and some things are not. Okay, now that sounds like a simple thing, and basically Stoicism at this point says, hey, what we're dealing with here is there are some things that we can actually have influence on, we can control. I mean, what is really in my control is my own thoughts, my own attitudes, my own decisions. These are within my control. Everything else is pretty much outside of it. Now, a lot of people object at this point and say, well, but can't you influence things? Can't you have a situation where that maybe you want to persuade somebody to do something? And I like how the author, Massimo Pigliucci, really brings out this idea that, we have a modern superiority complex that likes these people didn't know these questions or didn't come up with these questions themselves. I mean, there is one biblical verse that I will say is probably pretty true, and there is nothing new under the sun. And so what I'm saying here with this one is, I used to call it chronological snobbery, okay, where we look at what ancient authors say, well, they didn't think of this, and they didn't think, well, actually they probably did. They weren't stupid, and they knew they had objections to these philosophies. In fact, the philosophers of ancient Greek and ancient Rome were constantly in debate with each other, and it's certain that their opponents came up with these questions if we didn't do those things. So the idea that somehow they didn't think of all the possible maybe objections in life, where, yeah, there's some things in our control and some things are not, but there are some things we can still influence, they may not be under our control. And to be honest, I think the Stoics did answer those questions. Now, I'm not going to give away everything in the book. I want you to read it. Eventually, I am going to take some of these issues and break them down even further myself as I look at them as a Stoic myself. But I think the great analogy, the first highlight that really kind of stuck out to me, and it seems simple, but the more I thought about it, the more the analogy fits, is the analogy of sailing. My uncle used to have a sailboat, and even though I never went out on it, he used to talk about sailing. He says the real trick to sailing is if you're a person who likes to be in control of everything, you're not going to like sailing. Because sailing, he said, is you control the boat, you control the attitude of the sail, you control the rudder, you can kind of control your heading, you can control different aspects, but the wind is going to be the wind, the waves are going to be the waves, and there's really nothing you can do about those two things other than figure out where they're coming from, figure out where they're going, and use them to the best of your advantage. So I think that's really a good analogy for what the Stoics are getting across. And it was one of the highlights for me, highlight number 1, was this beginning to understand this idea of some things are in my power and some things are not, in the idea of sailing. And when you're out on a sailboat, you can control the sails, you can control the attitude of the ship, you can control the rudder, you can control your attitude about sailing it, and you're looking at it in a sense of looking for opportunities, or you're going to be negative about it and just like, oh man, I just hope I get to shore. It really, you have some things that are in your control, but the wind, the weather, whether it's raining or snowing or ice or hailing, none of that is in your control. And you got to figure out how to make the best of every situation given what you can control and given what you can influence. And I think that that was probably one of the first big highlights in helping me understand this concept, and hopefully it'll help you as well. The second thing is where I got to the end of the chapter, and there's 2 points that are kind of made out of the same point. But the second highlight for me was how Stoics point out how temporary everything in your life is. And coming to a good understanding of how temporary things are really gives you a sense of humbleness about the power that you actually do possess, that you have to learn, that you have to do other things. Because they talk about, I think it's Epictetus talks about the fact that when you're kissing your lover, or you're kissing a child, or a brother or sister or an uncle or aunt or your mother, father, you need to realize you're kissing a mortal and that someday they may not be there. And he really, kind of draws, we really can get the idea of, hey, we can consider things, okay, to be temporary. But we don't really look at the people in our life as temporary, but they are. And he's not saying to be callous about this, but he says, once you begin to understand how temporary everything is, you take grief a little bit better. And I think he's right about this. I remember when my father died, and I was still very religious, I always had this thought that I was going to see him again, and I clung to that. And it really didn't help me go through the grieving process, because it never allowed me to truly accept the death of my father. Once I became an atheist and I did accept that death, I still had a little bit of trouble with it in the idea of, well, if I'm not going to see him, there's a lot of things I'd like to say. And he says, and that was where it began to take off and where Stoicism kind of came in. And I didn't realize at the time it was a Stoicism, but a thought came to my own mind of, yeah, but everybody's like that. Everybody's temporary. And someday I'm going to be dead and my kids will be grieving over my loss. Hopefully that's the way it works out. I agree with the king in The Lord of the Rings. No parent should have to bury their child. They shouldn't have to, but it often does happen. But even in that case, the understanding of the temporary nature of things really helps you deal with the fact that the person that you're kissing, the person that you're hugging, the person that you're having a dialogue with, the friends you have, things like that are so temporary in life. And the first thing that does for you is, once you really grasp that concept, the second highlight of mine of grasping the concept, it allows you to accept the death of others much, much easier. And I think this may sound callous, but I also believe that the people that die, if they were to come back and talk to you, they would say, hey, move on with your life. Don't sit here and spend all this time grieving over me. You have a life to live, go live it. And I think we kind of get lost in this notion of, well, these people are always going to be around, which leads to my third highlight, which kind of puts the other side of it to it. So while they're alive, while the people in our life are alive, while the things that we enjoy are still around, while the situations and opportunities that we have are part of us and we can engage them, I think we should begin to learn a kind of a contentment with our position in life. I think a lot of people ask me, what I think most of society's problems in America is. It's our desire to possess and have stuff. But that just isn't extended to things. It's people too. There's so much of a desire to have power over others. But if you realize that you're temporary and everything else is temporary, you begin to appreciate more what you possess and kind of are anxious or trying to strive for something that you really can't control, really can't get a grasp on, and you really become much more contented. And I think you also get a lot more joy out of life when you're with the people that you're caring about. It gives you a lot more of an understanding, like, when you're with this person that you care about and you love, you really want to make the best of it if possible. Now, you don't want to put so much pressure on it, because there's a lot of things in those relationships that are outside of your control. But, I try to make it a point, for instance, whenever I meet with one of my children, to make sure they get a good hug from me, okay, and I love you, okay. I don't want them to ever think that the last meeting that they had with their father was one where they didn't hear me say I love you and they didn't get a hug from me. I try very much to remember that. Sometimes I forget, and then I try to feel bad about it. I say, oh, well, it's the past. I can't do anything about it. Let's move on. And next time I'll get it. But the idea of being contented and joyful with the people that you care about really comes from this idea when you understand there are some things that are in your control and others are not. One of the things that's not in your control is how long things and people are with you. And it doesn't mean that you don't try to influence situations if they're not completely under your control. But it does mean that you realize that there's a great deal of need of having the wisdom to discern the difference. Massimo uses the one prayer that it talks about, help me, give me the strength to know what I can change, give me, the humility to accept what I cannot change, and give me the wisdom to know the difference. And it's the serenity prayer, I believe. Now, I'm not very religious, but to me, that's more about philosophy than it is prayer. It's the beginning to understand that the real object of our goal, the real virtue that we're seeking here is wisdom. And it's the wisdom to know what's in our control and what we can do, focus our energy and our emotions and our mental powers and our physical powers on that. And then the things that we can't control, well, how can we control ourselves to make the most of these opportunities, to make the most of this time, to make the most of this aspects of our life? And I think that's the real issue. I really enjoyed reading this chapter because, as simple as it was, it's a basic philosophy now that I take everywhere I go. What can I control here? And often it's very little. And sometimes I just find myself and say, well, I'm not in control of anything right now other than my own attitude about this. And so I work on that. And I think it focuses you down on the things that really matter. And the other part of this, the third highlight that I gave, really struck with me too, because I look at it now as when I'm with people I care about and I love, when I'm talking with them, hopefully someday I'll have another woman as a lover and a friend. And when I get to that point, I want to make sure that I definitely appreciate the moments I have with them, because everything is temporary. I mean, I look back on my own failed marriage and think, there's a lot of times where I think if I, in taking responsibility for myself, if I had spent the time to truly appreciate being with my ex, maybe that's part on me. Now, part of that's on her, and I'm not regretting anything, that decision I made up to this point. And regrets are a waste of time, in my opinion. Stoicism very much says, hey, regrets are a waste of time, move on to the future, because you can't do anything about the past. That's not in your control. What you can do something about is where you are and where you're headed. Set your heading, get in your sailboat, do the things that you can do, but accept the things that you can't control, and instead say, okay, well, I want to go north, but the wind's blowing west, so if I tack west and then back east, and I'll still go north. It just might take me a lot longer time. Sometimes you have to do that with life too. I kind of feel like that right now. There's a direction I want to go, but my life just isn't opening up the opportunities right now for that, and so I'm taking the slow grind approach, and that's kind of where I'm at. Well, I want to thank you all for stopping by. This has been Simple Life Philosophy with your host, Ed Raby. Make sure you like, share, comment. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate all the efforts. If this channel is going to be something, it's going to be because of all of you. I really appreciate lately all the people that have come over from the Rabid Atheist. There's been quite a few that saw my video yesterday on that, and I've noticed that a lot of you come over here and you've subscribed as well, and it's good to see a lot of you again. So thank you all for that. But once again, this has been Ed Raby. I am your host here at Simple Life Philosophy, as I continue to search for a philosophy of life that is both simple to understand and easy to execute. And I just wish you all a good day and have a great one.